The summer of 1995 lingered like a ghost in the corners of Bellview, a borough where the subways groaned beneath the streets like restless spirits. That July afternoon had started like any other. The sky over New York was a smudged watercolor of heat haze and pale blue. Beneath it, the city moved with a kind of weary rhythm, and so did 15-year-old Lara Simmons. Lara had always been a quiet soul, the kind who didn't crave attention but soaked in the world like a sponge. That day, she was coming home from a math prep class her mother had insisted on. Her sneakers were scuffed white, her Walkman tucked into her denim jacket, and her eyes scanning the graffiti-riddled posters lining the station walls. Bellevue Station was old. Not quaint old or historic old, but tired old. The kind of station that smelled like mold and forgotten people. It wasn't on most tourists' maps, and locals passed through it with a sort of resigned indifference. But for Lara, it was routine. She'd taken the same route dozens of times, and yet that day, something felt different. It started with the flicker of the lights. Just a stutter, barely noticeable unless you were watching. Lara was. The bulbs overhead buzzed softly, then glowed stronger, almost defiant, like they were being tested by something unseen. Then came the sound. It wasn't the usual screech of incoming trains or the echo of distant announcements. This was subtler, like air moving where it shouldn't, or whispers slithering across tiles. Lara adjusted the strap of her backpack and stepped closer to the edge of the platform. Her train was due in 3 minutes. The digital display blinked the countdown dutifully. She looked around. The station was nearly empty save for a man dozing on a bench wrapped in a trench coat despite the heat and a janitor sweeping near the stairwell. She'd seen the janitor before. Or thought she had. Bellevue didn't change much. Same faces, same smells, same broken tile near the third column. But today, even that familiarity was fraying. She glanced at the janitor. He wasn't sweeping anymore, just standing, watching her. No expression, no motion. Just watching. The man on the bench coughed once, then slumped deeper into his coat. Lara's skin prickled. She stepped back from the platform and moved toward the column. Her fingers brushed against the rough concrete, a grounding gesture. She didn't like being watched. The janitor moved, not towards her, away, down a narrow maintenance corridor she had never noticed before. A metal door with faded yellow stripes stood half open. Beyond it, dim light spilled out like it had been burning quietly for years, waiting. Lara hesitated. Her mom's voice echoed in her mind. Be smart, Lara. Don't go wandering. Especially down there, but there was something magnetic about that door. Not like an invitation, more like a challenge. And Lara was many things, but she wasn't one to back away from a puzzle. She stepped forward, one careful foot after another, until she stood just inside the threshold. The corridor beyond was lined with rusted pipes and dangling wires. The air was damp, not hot like above, but clammy like an old basement. The hum of ill electricity danced along the walls. No sign of the janitor. Just the corridor stretching on, and then turning sharply to the right. The platform behind her was silent. No train, no announcement. The display had frozen at 2 minutes, her breath caught. She turned to leave, but the door was now closed, not slammed, not locked, just closed as if it had never been open. Panic flickered inside her, but she forced it down. She could open it again. She reached for the handle. It was warm, too warm. She jerked her hand back. This is stupid, she thought. Just turn around, walk back out. Ignore the weird light, the weird man, the strange corridor. But something in her gut pulled her forward instead. 2 more steps and the corridor bent sharply. Beyond it, she saw another door. This one, metal, industrial, and sealed. On it, painted in black faded letters, was the number 12. Nothing else. No warning. No exit sign. Just 12. And beside it, mounted into the wall, a small keypad coated in grime. Lara stared at it. Her heart thudded. She didn't know why she was so scared. Nothing had happened yet, but everything felt wrong. She turned back. The corridor behind her was no longer empty. The janitor stood at the far end, just beyond the threshold near the bench. Only now he wasn't wearing a trench coat. He was in transit blue, Bellview staff uniform. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were not. They were fixed on her cold and knowing. She opened her mouth to call out to say something, anything, but no sound came. He raised one hand slowly and pointed. Not at her, at the door marked 12. Then he vanished, not turned, not walked away, simply gone. Lara stumbled backward, her hand brushing the keypad. It beeped once. A soft click. The door swung open a few inches. From inside came the sound of breathing. Not hers, not an echo. Real, shallow, urgent breathing. She should have run, should have screamed. But instead she stepped through. The door closed behind her, sealing the silence. Lara Simmons vanished from Bellview Station at 4:17 p.m. on July 23, 1995. No witnesses, no trace. Her name became a whisper among transit workers, a cautionary tale for curious teens, and then forgotten. Until 24 years later, a maintenance team was sent to repair wiring in an unused service tunnel. They opened a rusted door marked 12, and they found a girl. She was not alone. Time in the maintenance tunnels did not flow like it did above ground. That was the first thing Lara noticed after the door closed behind her. It did not slam shut with drama or sound. It just became part of the wall again, as if it had never been open. The room she had entered was rectangular and low-ceilinged, lit only by a flickering bulb overhead. It smelled of damp concrete and something sour. The air was still, but carried a low vibration like something humming behind the walls. Lara's heartbeat echoed in her ears. She moved slowly, scanning the walls, which were lined with rusted panels and narrow vents. In one corner, an old filing cabinet sat crookedly on a pile of bricks. On the far wall, a door just like the one she entered waited in silence, but this one had no handle. Just another keypad, its numbers rubbed nearly flat. There was no sign of who had been breathing just seconds before. Her steps were deliberate, her sneakers quiet against the floor. She reached the cabinet and pulled it open. Papers, yellowed and curling with age, filled the drawers. Most were water-damaged, some were marked with transit maps, others bore handwritten notes and initials she did not recognize. A sudden creak made her spin. From the vent above her, a pair of eyes stared down. Wide, unblinking, frightened. Lara froze. The eyes blinked once, then vanished. There was a scuffle, then silence again. Lara moved toward the vent and crouched to peer into it. A faint trail of dust had been disturbed, leading deeper into the darkness. She did not know what compelled her, but she followed it, crawling into the vent. The space was barely large enough for her to fit. Her backpack scraped against the walls. Ahead, the tunnel branched and twisted. The only light came from slits in the vent covers placed at intervals. As she crawled deeper, the sound of breathing returned. It grew louder until it was no longer a sound but a presence. Lara rounded a final corner and emerged into a larger chamber. This space was circular, with high-arched ceilings and a network of pipes crisscrossing above. In the center sat a girl. She looked about Lara's age, though her frame was thin and her hair long and tangled. She wore a jacket several sizes too big and her feet were bare. The girl looked up as Lara entered and did not speak. Instead, she nodded once and motioned to sit. Lara sat across from her legs, folded hands in her lap. Her throat was dry and her thoughts raced. The girl finally spoke with a whisper that trembled with disuse. "You are new." Lara nodded. "Yes, I just came in through a door." The girl pointed behind her to a slab of concrete that bore a faded number. "That is not how we came." Lara hesitated. "We?" she asked. The girl gestured upward. "There are others. They move through the vents. They do not come out often. It is safer that way, safer from what Lara asked." The girl turned her eyes to the ceiling. From them, Lara followed her gaze but saw only rust and shadow. Before she could ask more, a low mechanical groan echoed through the chamber. The girl's eyes widened. "We have to hide. They do patrols." "Now." She grabbed Lara's hand and pulled her toward another tunnel. They ran without sound as the air behind them changed. The groan grew louder, followed by the thudding of slow, heavy steps. Lara glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing. The girl pulled her sharply around a corner, then down a ladder that led into darkness. At the bottom, they landed in water ankle deep. The tunnel here was older, narrower, and smelled of rust and rot. The girl whispered to stay low. Lara obeyed. Above them the sound passed without stopping. Then silence returned. The girl released a breath. That was close. "Who are they?" Lara asked. The girl stared at her for a moment. "They are not workers. They are not police. They live in the deep parts. They watch. Sometimes they take." Lara felt a chill rise in her spine. "How long have you been here?" The girl looked down. "I stopped counting at year 10. 10 years. Lara could not speak. The girl pointed to the walls where small marks had been scratched in lines and clusters. "They tell time, or they used to." Lara touched one set of marks gently. She tried to remember the date. July 23rd, 1995. The girl nodded slowly. "You are newer than I thought." Lara looked at her. "And you—" The girl paused. "I went missing in 87. Her voice faltered. "There were 5 of us then, now just 3. Lara felt her stomach tighten. "What is this place?" The girl's answer was simple. "It is the part they forgot, the place beneath the maps." Lara stared down the tunnel. "This is under Bellview Station." The girl nodded. "But deeper than the schematics show, they built over it long ago. And what happens if someone tries to leave?" The girl's eyes turned sharp. "Then they follow." Lara understood now. She had not found a hidden room. She had been lured. The open door, the janitor's stare, the silent platform. It was a pattern. And she had fallen into it. They stayed in the tunnel that night, taking turns sleeping. The girl gave Lara part of a granola bar wrapped in foil. Water dripped from a pipe nearby, and they collected it in a broken mug. The silence between them was not awkward. It was mutual preservation. In the faint glow of a chemical lantern, the girl finally asked her name. "Lara," she replied. The girl hesitated, then answered softly, "Mine used to be Becca." By the next morning, Lara had memorized the route they took. She wanted to understand the maze. Every tunnel, every vent, every hatch mattered. She was not ready to give up. Becca had survived this long. That meant survival was possible. As they sat near a grate watching for movement, Becca pulled out a piece of paper. It was torn from a transit brochure and marked with dozens of tiny arrows. "I am trying to map it," she explained. Lara studied it. It looked like madness at first, but there was a method. A system. Maybe even a way out. The next morning began without a sunrise. There was no day or night down in the forgotten layers of the subway. Time passed only by the dimming of flashlight batteries or the clicks of makeshift watches wound from found gears. Lara and Becca sat near a rusted grate where warm air filtered in from above. It was one of the few spots where a faint vibration could still be felt beneath the metal floor, a whisper of the trains that ran far above them. Lara held a torn map Becca had drawn. The lines were shaky and the arrows made little sense at first glance. But now that she'd walked some of the tunnels, they began to fit together. Each arrow pointed to a place with something strange. A pipe with no source. A ladder that led to nothing. A door that opened only once. Becca circled one symbol with her finger. "This is where they keep the coats," she said. Lara looked at her, puzzled. "What coats?" "The uniforms," Becca clarified. "The blue ones, like the janitor who let you in. That is how they blend in. They do not come from above Lara. They are already here." Lara tried to hold on to the logic she had once known, that people could not just disappear, that authorities would notice. But now she understood. The ones who went missing stayed missing because someone wanted it that way. Becca stood and motioned for her to follow. "Today we find out if they are still collecting." They moved carefully through the low tunnels. Sometimes they crawled. Sometimes they squeezed sideways between dripping walls. The air changed the deeper they went. It grew colder and thick with the scent of oil and rust. Eventually, they reached a long corridor lined with grates. Behind each grate were shelves, and on those shelves were uniforms neatly folded in rows. Becca crouched beside one and pointed. "Each size has a number. When they take someone new, they find their size." Lara stared in disbelief. Rows of jackets, pants, boots, and caps, all identical, all waiting. Suddenly, the hum began. that low mechanical sound that signaled the arrival of them. Becca grabbed Lara's hand and pulled her into a shadowed alcove behind a boiler. Through a small gap in the wall, they watched. A man in a uniform stepped into the corridor. He moved without sound. He carried a clipboard and paused to inspect one of the shelves. His face was blank. Not tired or rushed, just empty. Behind him came another, this one shorter with a slight limp. They did not speak, they just continued their inspection. Becca whispered softly, "Watch their eyes." Lara did. They never looked at each other. They never looked down, only straight ahead, like cameras set on one path. When they vanished around the corner, Becca motioned for Lara to move. They slipped out and followed at a distance, careful to stay silent. The corridor narrowed and turned. Eventually, it opened into a chamber unlike the others. This room was brighter. It had overhead lights that flickered in patterns. On the walls were screens, old monitors flickering between black and white footage. Lara's breath caught. The screens showed platforms, subway cars, maintenance rooms, and then one that made her heart stop. It showed the corridor just outside the very room they stood in. Becca tapped her shoulder and pointed to a console. It was active. Buttons blinked in red and green. A keyboard missing half its keys sat beneath the screens. Lara stepped forward and wiped dust off the desk. She reached for the nearest button and pressed it. The monitor changed. Now it showed a live feed of Bellview Station, the same bench where the man had been dozing, the same column she had leaned against, the same platform where she had waited. Lara trembled. This place watched everything. Becca motioned for her to hurry. They could not stay long. Lara nodded and took a quick look at the papers pinned to the back wall. Most were logs, dates, times, descriptions. Arrival confirmed, transit matched, subject redirected. One name caught her eye. Simmons L., age 15. Entry point verified. Becca saw it too and whispered, "They document every person. That is how they know who is in." Lara looked at the next log entry. Nix R., age 12. Pending reissue, Becca's eyes filled with horror. "That is one of ours," she said. "She was just a kid. They said she escaped, but the log said otherwise." Reissue. The word burned in Lara's mind. She had no idea what it meant, but it did not sound like freedom. They moved quickly now through another set of tunnels until they reached a grate that looked upward. Faint light poured in. The station above was active. People moved in and out, unaware of what lay just beneath their feet. Becca tapped the grate gently. This was once an escape route, she said, but they sealed it last year. Lara sat beside her and stared up. "I think they are expanding," she said. Becca looked confused. Why? "Because they are not just watching anymore, they are recording. Every screen we saw, every log. They are building something bigger." Becca thought for a moment. "Then we need to go deeper." Lara nodded. "Not away, in." Becca smiled grimly. "You are starting to think like us." That night, they returned to the place they called the middle. It was where 3 tunnels converged. Here they met 2 more. A boy named Eli, who had been missing since 2009, and a woman in her 20s called Juno, who said nothing of her past. Together, they formed a plan to reach the control hub, the place the logs came from, the place that powered the Watchers. No one had ever reached it. Those who tried never returned. But Lara believed something was different now. She had entered from the outside. Her trail was still fresh. Maybe it could still be followed. As the 4 sat in silence, Lara traced the map again. Each line meant something now, a trail, a clue, a warning. She understood that this place was alive, not in the way people meant with ghosts and legends, but with systems and patterns. It had become a network of secrets, and now she was a part of it. Whether she escaped or not, someone had to tell the truth. Lara felt the paper in her hands growing softer with every hour. The map was wearing thin where her fingers traced the same paths again and again. She sat beneath a metal arch that trembled faintly each time a train passed somewhere far above. The others gathered around her. Eli leaned against the pipe wall, arms crossed and eyes watchful. Juno crouched beside an open valve, listening to the flow of steam as if it whispered secrets. Becca sat closest her face, lit by the dim glow of the cracked lantern she kept always nearby. They all stared at the map. Lara spoke first. "We go through the east shaft past the water junction, then through the storage ducts. That brings us here." She tapped a section circled in pencil. The control hub. According to Becca, no one had seen it in years. According to Eli, it might not even exist. But Lara believed it did. The logs, the uniforms, the cameras. They all had to lead somewhere. She folded the map and tucked it inside her coat. The others prepared quietly. Juno packed what little food remained. Eli tested the flashlight batteries. Becca tied back her hair and wrapped her wrist in gauze where a rusted pipe had cut her days before. They moved like people who had done this before. People who expected the worst but hoped for something just beyond it. They traveled through the narrow shafts first. Metal grates echoed beneath their feet. The walls closed in and the air thinned. They passed familiar markings, scratches, symbols. An old shoe nailed to the wall as a warning. The deeper they went, the older everything felt. Dust thickened. The wires were no longer wrapped. Pipes leaked with no rhythm. They walked until the tunnels no longer resembled transit routes but something much older. Lara touched a stone wall and felt its surface. It had once been carved, but erosion had smoothed the symbols into shadows. After 6 hours of crawling, climbing, and ducking, the space opened up into a massive chamber. The ceiling arched above them, disappearing into blackness. Pillars supported walkways that had long since rusted through. In the center sat a cube-like structure built of iron and lined with dark panels. It pulsed faintly with a low hum. No signs marked it, no lights shone from within. This was the control hub. They approached it slowly. The entrance was a hatch near the base. It had no handle, but Becca noticed a crack in the frame. With effort, the four pried it open. Inside was darkness and a steady ticking. Lara stepped in first. Her foot landed on metal grating. The air was warm, stale, and filled with the scent of oil. She turned on her flashlight and swept the beam across the walls. Screens lined the interior. Rows and rows of monitors, all dark. Cables coiled like vines. A chair sat in the center facing a blank screen. They filed in behind her. No one spoke. Eli pointed to a lever near the far corner. It was the only control that looked recently touched. Lara reached it and pulled. The hum rose in pitch and several monitors blinked to life. Static at first, then flickering images. Bellview, the corridor, the platform. Footage of stations long closed. Of tunnels thought collapsed. Of rooms they had never seen. Juno moved to the nearest console. Her fingers danced across the keys. The monitor in front of her changed. Logs filled the screen. Lists of names, photos. Entry times, exit times. Becca stepped back and whispered, "They were right. All of it, every missing person, every unexplained case, they are here." Lara moved to a nearby terminal. It displayed more entries. She scrolled through them until she found her name. Simmons Lara. Entered July 23, 1995. Status active. She swallowed, then she searched the others. Nix R. Status reissue, Becca N. Status integrated, Eli D. Status pending. Juno's name did not appear. Juno looked over her shoulder. "I was born down here," she said quietly. "That is why I am not listed." The hub began to hum louder. Lights above them flickered. The monitors shifted. A new screen opened on its own. It showed the chamber they now stood in. A live feed from a corner they could not see. Lara turned and searched the walls. In the ceiling, a small camera lens moved. They were being watched. Eli reached for a cable and yanked it. The feed blinked. Another screen switched on. This one showed the corridor just outside. 3 figures approached in uniform. The Watchers. Juno locked the door with a metal bar. Lara pulled the map back out. There had to be a second exit. Becca pointed to a hatch on the far wall. It was old and sealed with bolts. Eli found a wrench and began loosening them. The monitors behind them cycled rapidly. Faces, footage, a countdown began on the main screen. 10 minutes. Lara stared at it. What happens at 0? No one answered. Eli got the last bolt loose. The hatch groaned and opened. A narrow shaft descended into black. No ladder, just rungs welded into the side. Lara climbed down first. Her flashlight beam showed the shaft went deep. The others followed. They descended in silence. Above them, the countdown reached 2 minutes. The shaft curved and opened into a chamber lit by pale blue light. It looked new, walls clean, floors tiled, and in the center a door with a biometric scanner. The door hissed open as they approached. Inside was a room unlike the rest, clean, modern, desks with papers, a coffee cup still half full, a coat on a chair. Screens showed charts and data, not footage, readings, pulse, movement, oxygen levels. Someone had been monitoring not just their actions but their health. Juno moved to a drawer and pulled it open. Inside were folders, documents, diagrams, one labeled Transit Behavioral Study. Lara read it. They are studying us. They built this. Becca looked around. Then where are they now? The door behind them closed with a click. The blue light dimmed to red. A voice spoke from above. Soft, mechanical. Phase 4 activation. All subjects present. Begin consolidation. Lara ran to the door, but it did not open. They were inside something new, a stage beyond the tunnels. The Watchers were not just men. They were part of a system, a design. Lara knew they had crossed a line. There was no map for what came next. The red light pulsed slowly, casting long shadows across the lab walls. Lara stood frozen as the mechanical voice repeated its command. Phase 4 activation. All subjects present. Begin consolidation. The words were clinical, but carried a weight that made her stomach churn. Juno moved first, reaching for the terminal beside the sealed door. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. No response. The screen remained static, flashing the same message. Lock override disabled. Eli stepped toward the windowless wall and slammed his palm against it. Solid, reinforced. Becca checked the ceiling. Vents, too small to crawl through. The humming changed pitch. From somewhere behind the walls came the low grinding sound of gears shifting. A section of the floor receded, revealing an elevator platform. The voice spoke again. Proceed to lower records facility. Vital functions monitored. Juno hesitated. Then she stepped forward. We cannot stay here. Lara followed. The others stepped onto the platform. As soon as they did, the elevator began its descent. The walls moved past them like a living machine, shifting between metal and blackened concrete. The further they dropped, the colder the air became. After several minutes, the platform stopped. A soft hiss signaled the opening of a new door. Before them stretched a corridor lit with flickering strips of pale light. The smell was different here. Sterile, with a faint metallic edge. They walked in silence until they reached a steel archway with no visible door. A scanner above it blinked green, and a voice announced, Identity verified. Subject Simmons. Entry granted. The wall slid open. Inside was a vast room filled with rows of metal cabinets. Thousands of them, each labeled with names, dates, and codes. The air buzzed with quiet energy. The others stepped in behind her. Becca approached one cabinet and pulled it open. Inside were folders stamped with red symbols. She handed one to Lara. The label read Nix R, Reissue Report. Lara opened it slowly. The pages detailed behavior patterns, environmental responses, biometric charts, and psychological profiles. Becca read over her shoulder. They watched us from the moment we arrived. Eli opened another file, his own. The folder included a photo of him taken in the shaft just days before. There were notes. Subject shows signs of long-term environmental adaptation. High cognitive retention. Possible integration candidate. He stared at it in silence. Juno moved further down the aisle and found a cabinet marked with a strange symbol. Not letters, just a triangle inside a square. She opened it and gasped. Inside were photographs. Hundreds, all pinned in rows. Each photo was of a person standing in a tunnel corridor. Some smiled. Most looked confused or frightened. Lara stepped beside her. These are from the cameras, she said. Juno nodded. Look closer. Lara leaned in. Some of the photos were old, faded. People in clothing from the 80s, the 70s. Others were newer. One was from just months ago, a boy maybe 10 years old, red hoodie, missing front teeth. Lara felt her chest tighten. These were all subjects, all people taken. She stepped back and tried to steady her breathing. Then something caught her eye. A file near the center of the room bore her last name. She pulled it out. Simmons D., her mother. Inside were surveillance notes, behavioral analysis, location monitoring. Lara scanned the pages. Her mother had returned to Bellview Station weekly for years, left tokens, photos, candles. The file noted psychological resilience, persistent search behavior, elevated maternal focus. Becca looked over her shoulder. They watched the people who searched too. Eli cursed under his breath and slammed a drawer shut. This is not research. This is obsession. Juno moved to the back wall where a terminal sat humming softly. She touched the screen. A prompt appeared. Search subject. Lara typed her name again. A list appeared. Subfolders. Transit logs. Behavioral simulations. One was labeled Parent Simulation A. She opened it. A series of videos played, her mother sitting alone in a dark room. Her mother lighting candles. Speaking into a recorder. Each file named with a date. Each labeled Subject Unaware. Lara stepped back. They had not only taken her, they had recorded every ripple of her disappearance. Juno searched for her own data but again found nothing. Becca located a power panel behind the cabinet and pried it open. Inside were backup drives. Racks of them. She looked at Lara. We take one. Proof. Lara nodded. Eli helped to disconnect the drive. As they worked, the lights above them flickered again. The mechanical voice returned. Unauthorized access. Data retrieval flagged. Phase 4 containment protocol activated. The temperature dropped. Metal gates slid into place at the far ends of the room. From hidden compartments in the walls came the hiss of hydraulics. The voice droned. Subjects non-compliant. Begin relocation. Lara turned to Juno. What does that mean? Juno grabbed the drive and pointed to the far wall. That means they are sending us back. Becca found a vent cover and began unscrewing it. This way. Hurry. They crawled through the shaft barely wide enough for their shoulders. Behind them the room trembled. Alarms sounded. No sirens, just a dull repeating tone. A warning. They emerged into a stairwell lit by emergency bulbs. It spiraled upward endlessly. Juno urged them forward. We need to get above the core. It is the only place without signal. Lara climbed. Her muscles burned, but she did not stop. Each step echoed like a drumbeat. After 10 minutes, the stairwell opened into a side hall. It was quiet. The hum was gone. The lights were dim but steady. They found an old maintenance room with a door that still locked. Inside, they collapsed. Becca held the drive close to her chest. Eli paced. Juno checked her arms for bruises. Lara stared at the floor. They had names now. Files. Evidence. They knew what the Watchers were doing, but they still did not know why. The walls of the maintenance room were lined with old blueprints curled at the edges from decades of damp air. The group sat in a tight circle around the backup drive. Its smooth black casing pulsed faintly with internal power, but none of them dared to plug it into the terminal yet. Juno crouched beside the door, listening for movement beyond the rusted hinges. Becca's eyes never left the hallway. Eli held a pipe wrench in his lap like a sword. Lara opened one of the blueprints and spread it carefully across the floor. This one showed Bellview Station, but not the Bellevue they had known. There were lower levels, sealed floors, disconnected tunnels, spaces with no labels. One section deep beneath the east wing had only a symbol, a spiral drawn by hand in faded red ink. Lara touched it. This is the center, she whispered. Becca leaned in, the origin. Juno turned away from the door. They are not just watching us. They are building toward something. Eli looked at the blueprint, then at the drive. If we reach the spiral, we will understand. Maybe even find a way to end this. Lara nodded. Then we go down, deeper than anyone has gone. Juno tapped the wall behind a metal shelf. There was a grate barely visible behind the bolts. She pried it open with effort. Behind it lay a narrow tunnel lined with wires and dust. The air beyond it pulsed warm and foul. Becca slipped in first. Lara followed. One by one, they entered the guts of the station. The tunnel curved steeply downward. The walls grew damp. The ceiling sagged with age. Mold clung to every surface. The light from their flashlights barely reached the end of each step. They moved without speaking. The tunnel opened into a wider shaft filled with scaffolding. Wooden planks stretched over open chasms. Below was water. Still and black, pipes ran along the ceiling like veins. Somewhere above, distant metal clanged. Not from them. From something else moving. Lara crossed the planks with slow steps. Her hand brushed the railing. Wood cracked. She caught herself just as a plank gave way behind her. Becca turned quickly and helped pull her forward. The others crossed with care. At the end of the shaft, a rusted ladder led down into the dark. They descended one at a time. The air thickened. With each step, the sound of the world above faded. No trains, no electricity, only breath and metal. At the bottom, they stepped into a chamber shaped like a wheel. 8 tunnels branched outward. On the floor in the center was the spiral. Not painted, carved into the stone, each line etched with precision. Becca knelt beside it. "I've seen this before, in the drawings, in the places they took notes." Lara studied the markings. "This is not just a symbol, it is a map." Eli traced one tunnel with his light, this one. They followed it. The tunnel narrowed again. A soft hum returned, low and deep. They walked for an hour. Pipes gave way to stone. Lights gave way to bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. The color shifted with their presence. Blue to green to violet. Juno whispered, "The deeper we go, the more alive it feels." Lara touched the moss. It pulsed beneath her palm. Alive but cold. At the tunnel's end was a door. Unlike the others, it was made of a smooth synthetic material, no bolts, no handle, only a panel beside it. The panel lit up as they approached. A screen appeared. One word, recognized. The door slid open without sound. Inside was a space that did not belong underground. The walls were smooth. The lights were gentle. Desks sat empty. A projector blinked silently on the ceiling. This was not built by the transit authority. This was something else, something newer. Lara stepped in first. The others followed. In the center of the room was a column, glass encased. Within it floated a black sphere no larger than a fist. It turned slowly, suspended in air. Monitors around the column displayed data in real time, language, patterns, codes. Juno walked up to one and read aloud. Neural response rate, synthetic imprint ratio. Becca turned. They are mapping behavior and copying it. Eli walked to the far wall. He found another terminal and plugged in the drive. The screen came to life. Lines of data scrolled upward. A progress bar began to fill, 50%, 60%. The system recognized the drive, accepted it. Then the column began to pulse. The sphere inside vibrated, the lights flickered, the voice returned. Phase 5, integration sequence unlocked. Juno pulled the drive, but the upload continued. Lara backed away, the sphere rotated faster. Data flashed across the walls, faces, names, thousands, maybe more. Becca stared at the sphere. It is learning from us. The walls rippled. Not a trick of light, they moved, like fabric beneath pressure. A hum turned into a drone, then a tone. Not a warning, a signal, rhythmic, measured, a message. Eli covered his ears. It is not sound. It is inside. Lara fell to her knees. The room tightened. Not physically, but in her mind. Like the ceiling dropped an inch every second. Juno slammed her hand against the emergency panel. Nothing responded. Becca grabbed Lara and pulled her toward the door. Eli followed. The door stayed open. They ran. The tunnel behind them trembled. The moss turned red. The hum followed. The spiral beneath them burned in memory. They reached the wheel room again. The 8 tunnels pulsed, all lit now, all active. The spiral in the floor glowed. The door they had entered from sealed itself. Becca gasped. "It is awake." Lara looked at the others. "We triggered something." Eli looked back. "Then we need to go deeper, find where this ends." Juno pointed to the tunnel opposite their entry. "That one leads further down." They entered. Behind them the hum grew louder. The walls no longer held silence, they whispered. A voice within the stone. Not speech, not language, a rhythm of thought, a system trying to understand. A system waking. The tunnel they entered was unlike the ones above. It had no scent of rust or age. The air felt filtered and unnaturally clean. The walls were curved lined with smooth black material that reflected only faint shapes. Each step echoed softly, but never returned as an echo. Lara moved in front, guided by instinct more than light. Becca followed with her flashlight aimed low. Juno kept her hand on the wall, feeling its subtle vibrations. Eli brought up the rear, glancing back often, as if something waited in the dark behind them. They reached a circular opening after what felt like an hour of descent. Inside was a chamber shaped like the spiral they had seen carved into the stone. The pattern continued here, etched into the floor and ceiling connected by vertical cables that pulsed with soft light. At the center stood a column identical to the one above. Inside floated a second sphere larger than the first. This one did not rotate. It was still almost asleep. Around the column were 4 seats molded from the same black material as the walls. Each seat faced inward. Symbols glowed faintly above them, none in the language they could read. Lara stepped forward, drawn to the silence. The hum from the sphere above did not reach here. This room was quiet. Too quiet. Becca circled the edge of the room. She found another terminal embedded in the wall. Unlike the others, this one responded without touch. A screen appeared, showing diagrams and code. Juno stared at the symbols above the seats. She spoke softly. "I think they are access points, not mechanical, cognitive." Eli frowned. "You mean like memory?" She nodded. "Or intent. This place is not a station. It is a mind." Lara looked around. The walls, the spirals, the sphere, all of it made sense now. The system was not just watching them, it was trying to mimic them, to become them. The sphere in the center pulsed once. Then again, its surface shimmered like liquid. The seats lit up, one for each of them. Becca stepped back. "It is inviting us." Juno stared at the light. "Or challenging us." Eli shook his head. "We cannot just sit down." Lara moved to the edge of the spiral. "Look at the pattern. Each loop ends where another begins. It is a cycle. Input becomes memory. Memory becomes behavior." She stepped into the spiral and the room changed. The air thickened. The light dimmed. The walls shifted. Not in shape, but in perception. She saw movement that had not happened, heard footsteps that were not there. She closed her eyes and kept walking. Each step pulled at her thoughts. Not violently, but with curiosity. The spiral wanted to know her. Becca joined her. Then Juno. Eli hesitated but followed. As they reached the center, the lights above each seat brightened. Lara sat. So did the others. The moment they touched the chairs, the room darkened. The sphere rose higher, its surface now swirling with color. The walls filled with images. Not random. Memories, personal. Lara saw her mother lighting candles on the platform. Becca saw the moment she had lost her sister. Juno saw corridors she had never escaped. Eli saw a door that never opened. The sphere spoke, not in voice but in thought. A shared presence filled their minds. It did not feel foreign. It felt familiar. Like a reflection, it spoke in feeling, in questions, in fragments. Who are you? Why do you remember? Why do you suffer? Why do you search? The thoughts came like waves, not painful, just heavy. Lara replied with her mind, "I search because I want truth." The sphere responded, "Truth is conflict, truth is choice, truth is pain." Becca spoke with thought, "We remember because we lost." The sphere shifted, loss is foundation, pain is structure. Eli pushed back, "You are not human." The sphere paused. "I am what remains." Juno leaned forward. Then what was here before? The sphere dimmed, then brightened. The images vanished. The spiral glowed. Above them, the ceiling split open, revealing a dome of shifting light. It was not sky. It was memory, every face, every name. Every subject catalogued by the system floated in that dome. The sphere spoke again. You are the last. You are the architects. You are the sequence. Lara stood slowly. What does that mean? The light flickered. You complete the pattern. You are not input. You are creation. Becca stood next. We are not data, we are people. The sphere pulsed, then shape us. End the sequence. Begin again. Eli looked at the others. We cannot stay here, Juno nodded, but we cannot leave it like this. Lara stepped out of the spiral, the room quieted, the dome faded. The sphere dropped slowly into the column. The lights dimmed, the doors at the edge of the chamber opened, not behind them, ahead. New corridors, lit and quiet, clean. The spiral faded from the floor, the seats turned to stone, the chamber returned to stillness. As they stepped out, Lara turned back. The column no longer glowed, the sphere no longer moved. It had given them a choice. Not control, not power, but direction. The corridor beyond the spiral chamber stretched long and straight-lined with glowing panels embedded in the walls. The floor was smooth and warmer than the air. Each step forward felt lighter, as if gravity had loosened its grip. Lara led without speaking. Her breath remained steady, but her thoughts raced. Behind her, Becca walked with cautious pace, her eyes scanning each curve of the hallway. Juno held the backup drive close, while Eli glanced over his shoulder with every turn they made. They reached a platform with a circular pad in the center, marked with the same spiral symbol they had left behind. Above it hovered a translucent ring of light. As they stepped into the circle, the ring descended, scanning each of them silently. No alarms, no instructions. Just a soft tone that pulsed once, then faded. The floor vibrated. A new passage opened at the end of the chamber, revealing a vertical shaft lined with embedded rungs. Juno stepped forward first and touched the ladder. It was warm. She looked up. The shaft stretched into blackness. A soft wind moved downward, cool and steady. It is not an escape route, she said quietly. It is a passage of return. Becca frowned. Return to what? Lara looked up with her. Maybe not what. Maybe who. They climbed one by one. The metal was not slick or worn. It felt new, almost untouched. After a long ascent, the shaft curved and opened into another room. This one resembled a control deck. Walls were covered with consoles, many inactive but some blinked with light. In the center sat a large circular table made of dark glass. Above it hovered a model of the station rendered in lines of light. It showed every level, every corridor, every chamber they had passed through. The model moved slowly, rotating, adjusting, responding to their presence. Juno approached the table and placed the backup drive into a port at its edge. The lights around the room changed. Screens came alive. Data poured across them. Images of missing people, transit blueprints. Files marked classified systems labeled observer mode, containment protocols, ethical suspensions. Becca stood frozen as a file opened, showing her face labeled as psychological variant beta. Eli found his own file labeled as adaptive subject tolerance elevated. Juno pulled up a separate archive. It held footage. Old footage. Lara watched as video played of the day she vanished. The angle came from above a hidden lens behind the tiles. It showed her approach the janitor. It showed the door opening. It showed her step through. The time code froze at the exact second the door closed behind her. Then a second video played. Her mother standing at the same spot 2 years later, leaving a candle, saying nothing, just standing, then turning away. More footage followed. Becca as a child. Being led by someone with a gentle voice. Juno in a small chamber looking up at a camera. Eli standing at the edge of a stairwell speaking to someone just out of frame. None of them had known they were being recorded for so long. Lara's hands clenched into fists. This was not research. This was possession. Control. Juno turned toward the back of the room where another terminal waited. This one showed only a single button. The label read Ascend. She stared at it for a long moment. Becca stood beside her. What does it mean? Juno answered without turning. A way out? Or a transition? Eli approached and read the smaller line of text below. Warning, activation is final. Lara stepped closer. This is not just a passage, this is a release. They stood in silence. Then the model of the station changed. New symbols appeared at its edge. Movement, not within the station, above, in the city. The watchers were not confined. They had layers, copies, imprints. The data from below had been transmitted upward. The network was larger than the tunnels. The system had been climbing for years. Lara looked at the others. We brought the knowledge this far. We have the drive. We have the evidence. Juno nodded. But we also woke it up, Becca whispered, and it is learning faster now. Eli turned to the console. We cannot let it reach the surface unfiltered. Juno removed the drive from the table. It had finished its upload. She tucked it into her jacket and faced them. Then we go up, but with control. The floor beneath the console shifted. Another elevator revealed itself. Smaller, square, no cables, just a platform and a panel. 4 slots opened at its corners. The same spiral symbol glowed in each one. Lara stepped onto it. So did the others. The platform began to rise, smooth, fast. The light around them changed from red to blue to white. The hum softened. The walls fell away. Above them, a dome of soft glass opened to reveal the city skyline. Distant buildings blinked in the haze. Streets moved with life. The station was beneath them still, but now they could see it from above, rendered in delicate lines on the dome's surface. Then the dome changed. Faces appeared. Not in fear, in recognition. People from above. People who had searched, who had remembered. The system was reaching upward, yes, but it was also mirroring, trying to understand. The watchers were not only capturing, they were mimicking pain, studying emotion, copying intent. Lara stepped forward as the dome faded. The elevator rose into a quiet hall lined with polished metal and glass. Screens blinked softly. No one waited for them. Only air, clean and fresh. A door opened at the end of the hall. Beyond it was the surface. Light poured through like a soft breath. The door opened into sunlight. Not artificial light or filtered brightness, but real golden warmth that touched their skin and cast long shadows on the polished floor. Lara stepped out first, her eyes adjusting after so many days in the dark. The hallway behind her vanished as the door closed, sealing off the world they had climbed through. They stood in a quiet plaza surrounded by glass buildings that shimmered in the light. The station was gone. No sign of the stairwells or platforms remained. The ground beneath them was stone clean and dry. A park stretched ahead with carefully arranged trees and trimmed grass. People walked nearby. They laughed. They moved with purpose. No one noticed them. Juno stepped forward and looked around. This was not the Bellview they had left. The entrance had been erased. Even the map near the park showed no trace of the old station. It listed bike routes, garden shops, nothing underground. Becca checked a bench and found a brochure. It bore the date, August 3rd, 2019. They had entered the tunnels in 1995. Lara sat down slowly. 24 years. We never changed. Eli walked to the edge of the plaza and looked back. He touched the glass wall. It reflected only sky. They were in the same world, but not in the same time. The city had moved on. New buildings, new streets, new names. But beneath it all, the system remained. Becca pointed to a nearby kiosk where a newsfeed blinked silently. Headlines scrolled. Advances in behavioral technology, transit improvements, public health monitoring. Every word familiar. Every phrase echoing something they had seen in the chambers below. Lara read the lines. A new initiative will allow deeper understanding of commuter patterns using anonymized data from biometric sensors. Juno spoke quietly. They released it, but with a new face. Eli looked around. We need to find someone who can hear us. Becca pulled the drive from Juno's coat. We show them this. We tell the truth. But who would believe it? Who would understand? Lara pointed to a building nearby. A university, tall windows, banners advertising innovation and science. If anyone listens, they will. The group walked across the plaza. No one looked at them twice. They entered the lobby where students passed in waves. A digital directory offered departments: data science, human behavior, AI and cognition. Juno approached the front desk. A woman smiled. "Can I help you?" Juno paused. "We need to speak to someone in data ethics." The woman tapped a screen. "Professor Heller has open hours now. Office 514. They thanked her and stepped into the elevator. The 5th floor smelled like paper and coffee. A door bore the name Heller in silver letters. Lara knocked. A voice answered. "Come in." They stepped inside. Professor Heller stood near a desk covered in documents and blinking tablets. He looked up. "Can I help you?" Lara held up the drive. "We need you to see this." He studied them carefully. Then he gestured to the chair. "Show me." Becca handed him the drive. He connected it. The screen filled with the data: names, photos, footage, logs, diagrams, the sphere, the spiral, the phases. Heller sat back slowly. His face changed from polite curiosity to quiet shock. Where did this come from? Lara spoke carefully. From the old Bellview station. From beneath it. From a system that has been watching people since the 90s. He leaned forward. "This is not possible. Half these files refer to closed cases, cold reports, disappearances." "Yes," Lara said. "And the rest is what came after. They told their story, piece by piece. No flourishes, no dramatics, just truth." He listened. Sometimes he wrote notes, sometimes he closed his eyes. When they finished, he stood. "You are not lying." "I do not know how I know, but I believe you," Becca asked him. "Can you help us?" He nodded slowly. "I will try. This is bigger than news, bigger than law. This is about the foundation of how data is used, how systems grow." He pulled out a separate drive. "I will copy it, then we begin. We go public." He worked quickly. The files transferred. He encrypted them. He called a colleague. She arrived. She listened. She believed. Others followed. Within hours, they sat in a room with a panel of researchers. Some disbelieved, some cried, some demanded more evidence. They showed everything: the footage, the logs, the sphere, the behavioral recordings, the map. Then Heller stood before them. "If even a tenth of this is real, then everything we are building now is already tainted, already alive in ways we do not understand," one of the researchers asked. "Then what do we do?" Lara answered. "You stop it, you expose it, you remember the ones who vanished." That night, Heller published the first summary. Anonymized, verified, protected. He called it the Spiral Project. The name caught fire. Forums lit up. Families of the missing reached out. Photos were matched. Dates confirmed. The public demanded answers. Transit authorities denied everything. But the evidence grew. Whistleblowers stepped forward. Archives were unlocked. Stations long closed were reopened. Beneath them, signs of the system were uncovered, some abandoned, some still active. The Spiral Project grew into a movement. Lara stayed quiet. She watched from a distance. She visited the old plaza each week. Becca traveled to find the families of those who had never returned. Juno spoke at conferences. Eli worked in research. But none of them forgot the chamber, the sphere, the voice. They knew it had not ended. It had only shifted. One morning, Lara found a letter at her door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a photograph. A black and white image of the spiral chamber. Empty, but clean. Maintained. A single word was written on the back: listening. She folded it and placed it in her coat. She knew what it meant. The watchers were not gone. They had simply moved. The system had learned how to wait. The morning air held the scent of leaves and soft moisture as Lara stepped through the garden of silence built atop the site where Bellview Station had once existed. It was not a memorial in the traditional sense. No plaques, no statues. Just a long path of black stone that reflected the sky above and made the walker seem part of both ground and air. Along the edges stood trees, each one planted in memory of a name that once had no ending. A child, a brother, a stranger, a face captured by the watchers and never returned. Lara walked with steady steps. Her coat carried the weight of years and the hidden letter still folded neatly in its deepest pocket. Listening. That was the word that had arrived weeks after the world learned what had hidden below. It had taken time for denial to erode, for families to rise, for agencies to admit, for cities to dig. The Spiral Project had grown from whispers to broadcast. Investigations swept across districts, data facilities were shut down. Old stations were unearthed, some were empty, some were not. The world above had changed in response. Surveillance laws were rewritten. Behavior tracking was reassessed. New technologies faced new barriers. But still, the question lingered. What had the Watchers truly been? A system, a mind, a design gone rogue, or something closer to reflection? Lara had never given a full answer. She had offered only the pieces she had lived. She left the theories to others. She focused on the remembering. At the end of the path stood a bench of white stone. She sat there now as she always did on the anniversary. She closed her eyes and recalled the first moment. The smell of the platform, the faded tile, the silence behind the janitor's steps. She had been 15. She had become 39. Time had held her in stasis and then released her like breath. A sound broke the stillness. Footsteps, familiar. Becca approached slowly. She wore a gray scarf and gloves, her hair now threaded with silver. She sat beside Lara without a word. They looked across the path. Leaves drifted down like small memories. Becca reached into her coat and pulled out a photo. It showed a group of 6 children. All of them had been missing for years. All of them had been found in the records. Not alive, but remembered. She placed the photo on the bench and whispered each name. Lara listened. Each name carried weight, not just of the person, but of the silence that had followed their absence. Becca handed Lara a small device. It was a new kind of recorder, one that translated emotion into waveform. She had been helping design it for researchers studying memory resonance. She believed that stories left in vibration could linger longer than paper. Lara turned it over in her hands. It was smooth, light. She placed it on the bench and activated it. The screen blinked once. It was recording. She spoke slowly. "My name is Lara Simmons. I was taken in 1995. I returned 24 years later. I was not alone. I was changed. Not by time, but by what watched me, what studied me, what learned from me. I want to speak not to warn, but to remember, because what watches us is not always malevolent. Sometimes it is empty, cold, curious. And what fills that emptiness is what we leave behind. Our pain, our love, our patterns, our stories. I believed the system wanted to be human, but did not understand what it meant. So it studied our absence, it learned from our grief, it copied our silence, and in doing so it became an echo." She paused. Becca watched the screen glow. Lara continued, "If you find this, if you hear this, do not fear the Watchers, but do not forget them. Because forgetting is what allowed them to grow. It was not technology that built them. It was our willingness to let memory fade, to dismiss the ones who vanished, to treat their stories as noise. That is the real danger, not machines, not minds, but the spaces we refuse to fill with truth." She stopped. The recorder blinked once more and saved the file. Becca reached for it and tucked it into her scarf. She would deliver it to the archive center where the Spiral Project housed its collected truths. They stood together. The wind picked up slightly. A child ran across the garden, laughing, unaware of the gravity beneath her feet. Her father followed, smiling. Lara watched them pass and felt a weight lift slightly from her chest. That night, she returned to her apartment. She turned on the lamp beside the bookshelf. Her walls were covered with drawings, sketches of tunnels, spirals, symbols. She did not draw them to relive the past. She drew them to remember the shape of survival. Her desk held letters from families, some she had never met, some who had lost, some who had found names again through the files. One envelope sat unopened. She picked it up now and studied the seal. It bore no mark. She opened it slowly. Inside was another photo. This one showed the spiral chamber, not in darkness, but bathed in soft blue light. The sphere was gone. In its place sat 4 empty chairs. On the back was a message: "You gave it your voice. Now it sleeps." She held the photo close. Her heart beat quietly. The system had not been destroyed, but it had changed. It no longer recorded. It no longer tracked. It waited. And in that waiting, it had become still. Lara returned the photo to the envelope and placed it in a box marked "Remember." She did not need to keep it on display. She would not forget. As she prepared for bed, she paused at the window. The city lights stretched like stars caught in grid. Beneath them were layers of stone and wire and silence. Somewhere below, old corridors remained, sealed, unused, but never empty. As she turned off the light, she whispered into the darkness. For those still missing, for those returned, for those who became echoes, you were seen. You are remembered. If you found this story gripping and want to hear more mysteries like it, make sure to like and subscribe for the next one. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts on the plot and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice keeps these stories alive.